In a quiet North American town lived Clara Belmont, a 25-year-old who had recently graduated from college. After landing a challenging job in the nearby metropolis, Clara found herself in a constant state of stress, navigating the turbulent waters of her new career. Her only refuge was her afternoon walks through the forest near her home, where the serenity of nature served as a balm for her troubled soul. One of these afternoons, after a particularly exhausting day, Clara decided to venture a little further off the beaten track, seduced by the enigmatic beauty of the forest. She had always maintained a respectable wariness of the wilderness, knowing the risks posed by animals such as wolves and bears. That day, however, something inside her cried out for an escape, a detour from the stifling routine. As the sun began to paint the sky orange, a piercing sound interrupted the tranquility of the moment. A high-pitched, painful meow. Clara stopped, her heart pounding with fear and curiosity. The sound was like nothing she had ever heard before. It was a call full of anguish, impossible to ignore. Moved by a sudden compassion, Clara followed the sound to a small clearing where she came across a scene that would touch her heart irrevocably. A large cat, with a gray coat and intensely green eyes, was trapped in a wire snare, desperately struggling to free itself. "My God, what's happened here?" Clara murmured, carefully approaching. The cat, upon realizing her presence, stopped struggling and watched her with a look that mixed fear and a hint of hope. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," Clara whispered, kneeling down next to the animal. She noticed that the wire was wrapped tightly around one of the cat's paws, cutting into its skin. With trembling hands, Clara took a small knife from her pocket, which she carried with her for safety, and began to cut the wire. The cat watched her every move, motionless, as if it understood her intention to save it. After a few tense moments, the wire gave way and the cat was released. Clara stepped back slightly, expecting the animal to flee to the safety of the forest. However, to her surprise, the cat approached, rubbing against her legs and purring softly, as if thanking her for her freedom. "You're a very brave little animal, aren't you?" Clara said, gently stroking the cat's head, noticing a glint of intelligence in its eyes. "Let's see what we can do for that injured paw." At that moment, Clara decided that she would help that mysterious cat to recover. What she didn't know was that this unexpected encounter would only be the beginning of a story full of mysteries, dramas, and unbreakable bonds. In the days that followed her unexpected encounter, Clara felt strangely responsible for the well-being of the cat, whom she affectionately nicknamed Shadow, due to his ability to silently appear and disappear. Her evening routine now included taking food to the place where she had found him, and, to her surprise, Shadow was always there waiting. On one of these nights, as the moon cast a silvery glow over the forest, creating dancing shadows between the trees, Clara found Shadow sitting patiently, as if he understood the bond they were forming. "You're already waiting for me, aren't you?" Clara murmured, putting the food down. Shadow approached, still limping from his injured paw, but clearly improving. "Looks like we're becoming friends, huh?" Clara said, smiling, as she watched Shadow eat. Just then, a subtle noise caught her attention. She turned around, heart racing, but it was only the wind rustling through the leaves. Turning her attention to Shadow, Clara noticed how relaxed he seemed in her presence. "You need a safe place to recover completely," she thought aloud. Determined, Clara set about creating a small shelter near her house, where Shadow could feel protected and free at the same time. Over the next few days, while building the shelter with materials she had collected in the forest and some old items from her house, Clara realized how important Shadow had become to her. It was as if the cat had brought a new sense of purpose to her life, a counterpoint to the exhausting routine of work. The completion of the shelter coincided with a particularly beautiful twilight, where the last rays of sunlight tinged the sky with vibrant colors. Clara called Shadow, who hesitantly inspected the shelter, going in and out a few times before settling down comfortably. That night, as Clara sat near the shelter, sharing the silence with Shadow, she felt a deep connection with the cat. It was as if, in some mysterious way, Shadow understood her innermost thoughts and emotions. "You know, Shadow, I always felt a bit lost, even though everything seemed to be in place," Clara confessed, stroking Shadow's head. "But somehow, looking after you has brought me a peace I didn't know I was looking for." The cat purred, nuzzling against her, and Clara smiled, feeling a wave of contentment. The bond they had formed was unquestionable, but what Clara didn't yet know was that Shadow would bring much more than peace of mind to her life. Soon, secrets hidden in the darkness of the forest would begin to reveal themselves, testing the depth of their connection in ways she could never have imagined. Clara and Sombra's daily routine developed naturally, as if they had both found in each other the perfect balance for their lives. However, on a morning that promised to be like any other, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Clara didn't show up at the meeting place with Sombra. The day passed, and Clara's absence became a disturbing enigma for the cat, whose anticipation turned to restlessness as the sun went down. Lost in thought, Shadow recalled the moments he had shared with Clara. He missed her reassuring presence, her soft voice that spoke words of comfort and encouragement. The connection they had formed was strong, and her absence left a void that Shadow didn't know how to fill. As night fell, a decision took shape in Sombra's mind. Driven by loyalty and a deep instinct that he didn't fully understand, he decided to set off in search of Clara. The journey was risky. The forest at night was a place of shadows and unfamiliar sounds, but the urge to find Clara was stronger than any fear. Sombra walked through the forest under the moonlight, guided by the smell and the memory of the paths Clara used to take. His heightened senses alerted him to the dangers hidden in the darkness, but the image of Clara, smiling at him, gave him the courage to continue. Finally, after a long journey that tested his resolve, Sombra reached the city limits. The streets were silent, with only the sounds of the night filling the air. He followed a familiar path, one that led to Clara's house, hoping against all the odds to find her there. But Clara wasn't home. The window was open, as if someone had rushed out, leaving behind a silence that weighed heavily on Sombra's heart. It was then that an unfamiliar scent caught his attention, leading him away from Clara's house towards an uncertain destination. Shadow followed the scent to an old hospital at the other end of town. There, hidden in the shadows, he watched, hoping for some sign of Clara. What he found, however, was something he had never expected. A parked ambulance, with the back doors open, revealing a stretcher with a motionless figure covered in a white sheet. Shadow's heart froze. He couldn't believe that Clara was under that sheet. He had to find out the truth. He had to find Clara, no matter what the cost. With his heart squeezed by uncertainty and his chest inflated by hope, Sombra prepared to enter the hospital, ready to face the unknown in search of his beloved friend. The night still held its mysteries, and Sombra knew he was about to discover truths that could change everything. His instincts told him that the bond between him and Clara was strong enough to overcome any challenge, but he was about to discover just how deep that bond really was. That silent night, Sombra, his heart filled with fear and determination, moved cautiously towards the interior of the hospital, moving between shadows and avoiding the prying eyes of those still walking the corridors. His intuition guided him, whispering to him that Clara was there, somewhere, needing him as much as he needed her. Inside the hospital, the cat found himself in a maze of sterile corridors and rooms lit by cold lights. He skillfully dodged nurses and patients, using his feline instinct to remain invisible. His search led him to an ajar door, from which a familiar energy emanated. It was there. He could feel it. Shadow entered the room quietly, his green eyes glowing in the dark. And there, under the soft light of a lamp, was Clara, lying in a hospital bed, a sight that both calmed and stirred Shadow's heart. She looked peaceful, but something was out of place. A bandage wrapped her head, and machines beeped beside her, monitoring her condition. "Clara," Shadow whispered, moving closer to her, his soft purr filling the room. At the sound of the familiar voice, Clara stirred slightly, her lips moving in an inaudible whisper. Shadow jumped gently onto the edge of the bed, brushing his cheek against her hand, trying in every way to communicate his presence and his relief at finding her. It was at that moment, on the brink of reunion, that the unexpected happened. Clara, guided by a mysterious force, slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze, initially confused, focused on Sombra, and a faint smile lit up her face. "Shadow?" she murmured, her voice weak but full of affection. "You came to find me?" Just then, a nurse entered the room, surprised to see the cat next to Clara. "How did you get in here?" he exclaimed, but when he saw the smile on Clara's face, his expression softened. "It seems you have a rather special visitor." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors were called in, and Clara underwent a series of tests. Shadow, although reluctant to leave Clara's side, was gently ushered out of the room, but not before Clara whispered, "Stay close, please." While waiting in the corridor, Sombra was approached by a middle-aged woman in a white coat. She knelt down beside him, her expression serious but kind. "You must be Sombra," she said, stroking his head. "Clara has told me a lot about you. Thank God she's a Waki. She had a bad accident and hit her head. We were worried, but she's reacting well to the treatment. You seem to have played an important role in that." Shadow, understanding only the comforting tone of the woman's voice, remained by her side, waiting patiently. He knew that his place was there, by Clara's side, no matter what happened. As the night unfolded in a blanket of stars and silence, Shadow felt an uneasy peace. Clara was safe for the moment, but the mysteries of that night still hung in the air, promising revelations that neither of them could foresee. The bond between them had proved unbreakable, but the shadows of fate still hid secrets that were about to be unraveled. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, bathing the corridors in a golden light, Clara began to awaken from the veil of unconsciousness, the events of the previous night still blurred in her memory. Beside her, a familiar and comforting presence, Shadow, the cat who had become her unexpected guardian, was waiting patiently. Clara tried to sit up, confused but relieved to find Shadow there. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice still weak. Sombra, unable to answer with words, simply leaned his head against her hand, his soft purring filling the room with a sense of calm. It was then that the doctor who had spoken to Sombra the night before came in. "Good morning, Clara. I see you have a very loyal visitor," she said, smiling when she saw Sombra. "You gave us quite a fright, but fortunately you're recovering well. The impact was serious, but it didn't leave any permanent damage." Clara listened, trying to absorb the information. "But how did I end up here? And how did Shadow find me?" The doctor sat down next to Clara, explaining the events. "You had an accident, a fall. You were found unconscious near the forest. Someone must have called the emergency. And as for Shadow, well, he must have followed his instinct here. Animals have incredible perception when it comes to their humans." Clara processed the words, her mind still trying to put the pieces together. Looking at Sombra, she felt a wave of gratitude. "He saved my life, didn't he?" she said, more to herself than to the doctor. The doctor nodded. "It would seem so. Your presence here must have somehow given you the strength to fight." The words echoed in Clara's mind as she stroked Shadow. The bond they had formed transcended human understanding, connecting them in a deep and mysterious way. Over the next few days, Clara continued her recovery in hospital, with Sombra always by her side. He had become something of a celebrity among the hospital staff, a symbol of loyalty and unconditional love. However, Clara's mind was restless. Had the accident really been a fall? And who had called the emergency services? Clara felt there was more to the story than she had been told. Determined to find out, she began asking questions. searching the depths of her fragmented memory for any clue that might shed light on the mystery of her fall. It was on a quiet afternoon that Clara was visited by a nurse who had been on duty the night of her accident. "I hear you're trying to remember what happened," said the nurse, taking a seat beside the bed. "I don't know much, but I remember that when you were brought in, there was a man with you. He was very worried, insisted that we take good care of you, and then disappeared before we could get his details." "A man?" Clara tried to remember, but her memory was like a book whose pages were stuck together. "A man?" she mumbled, confused. "But who?" The nurse's words shed new light on the events of that fateful night, suggesting that Clara's fall might not have been a simple accident. More importantly, they indicated that there was someone out there, an unknown protector whose identity remained a mystery. As Clara contemplated these revelations, Sombra, sensing her unease, purred softly, reminding her that no matter how dark or deep the secrets, they would face them together, illuminating the shadows with the light of truth. The search for answers had only just begun, and Clara knew that, with Shadow by her side, she was ready to unravel the mysteries that surrounded her. With Clara's convalescence and the nurse's revelations, a new chapter began. Determined to discover the truth behind her accident, Clara knew she couldn't do it alone. Sombra, her faithful companion, would be by her side, but she needed more. One day, after being discharged from hospital, Clara decided it was time to act. With Shadow following close behind, she returned to the site of her accident in the forest, hoping that it might awaken some dormant memory. The place was quiet, as if nature had erased any sign of that tumultuous night. As she walked, Clara felt a strange sensation of being watched. Shadow also seemed alert, his green eyes scanning the forest. It was then that a figure emerged from the shadows, an enigmatic-looking man with eyes that reflected a mixture of concern and relief at seeing her. "Are you all right?" he asked, approaching carefully. Clara, surprised and a little suspicious, replied, I'm trying to understand what happened here." The man nodded, as if he understood his search for answers. "That night I was walking through the forest when I heard a noise. I found you lying unconscious on the ground. I called emergency and stayed until the ambulance arrived. I was worried." Clara looked at the man, trying to read his expression. "Why didn't you stay? Why didn't anyone tell me about you?" He looked away, clearly struggling with his own emotions. "I have my reasons for keeping my distance from people, but when I saw you in that situation, I couldn't just ignore it. After the doctors arrived, I stayed away. I didn't think it would matter afterwards." The conversation was interrupted by Shadow, who approached the man, rubbing against his legs with a soft purr. There was a recognition there, a confidence that Sombra rarely showed to strangers. "You saved my life," Clara said, her voice laden with gratitude. "But there's still something that doesn't make sense. How did I fall? Was it really an accident?" The man hesitated, his gaze fixed on the forest floor. I saw someone running away from the scene. I couldn't see who it was, but it seemed intentional." This revelation sent shockwaves through Clara. The possibility that her accident had been an act of sabotage was something she hadn't considered. "I need to know who did this," Clara said, determination burning in her eyes. "Will you help me find out?" The man nodded, decision evident on his face. "I'll help you, Clara. Someone who does something like this doesn't deserve to go unpunished." In the days that followed, Clara and the man she learned to call Lucas, together with Sombra, formed an unlikely team. Together, they began to put the pieces of the puzzle together, following clues and looking for any evidence that might lead to the person responsible for the attempt on Clara's life. As they investigated, the bond between Clara, Sombra, and Lucas grew stronger, united by a common goal and the growing friendship that blossomed between them. Clara was grateful not only to have survived, but also to have found an unexpected ally in Lucas, and to have Sombra, her four-legged guardian angel, by her side at all times. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of the forest and the secrets of the city. Clara knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but she also knew that, with Sombra and Lucas by her side, there was no mystery they couldn't unravel. Together, they were ready to face the unknown, armed with courage, friendship, and the determination to bring to light what had been hidden in the shadows. The search for the truth led Clara, Lucas, and Sombra down unexpected paths. They interviewed local residents and followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. Lucas, with his knowledge of the area and tracking skills, proved to be an invaluable ally, while Sombra, with her feline intuition, often guided them through unexplained insights. After weeks of investigation, a clue came to light, leading them to an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. It was a place forgotten by time, but evidence suggested that someone had been there recently. Cautiously, they explored the terrain, Shadow leading the way, as if he could sense the presence of answers among the shadows. It was then that they found, hidden in an old hut, a set of documents that shed light on the events of that fateful night. The documents revealed a long-standing dispute between two local families, one of whom owned land where Clara used to walk. It seemed that the attempt to drive her away had been a miscalculated warning, which had ended in disaster. While they were digesting their findings, Lucas noticed a series of photographs among the papers, showing Clara on several of her walks, proving that she had been observed for some time. "This wasn't a random accident," said Lucas, anger evident in his voice. "It was deliberate." Equipped with the evidence, they decided to take the case to the police. The subsequent investigation revealed the identity of the attacker, a rival family member, motivated by a misinterpretation of an old feud over rights of way through the forest. As justice took its course, Clara, Lucas, and Sombra found themselves in a clearing in the forest, the place where it all began. Clara looked at Sombra, whose green eyes reflected the sunlight filtering through the treetops, and then at Lucas, whose unwavering support had been a beacon of hope in the midst of the turmoil. "Without you two, I would never have found the truth," said Clara, her voice charged with emotion. "Not just the truth about the accident, but the truth about the strength of friendship and loyalty."